My name is Irene Yolette, and I am 32 years old. 5 years ago, my sister told my parents that I dropped out of medical school. She lied, and that single lie cost me my entire family. They cut me off completely. They blocked my number. They skipped my residency graduation, and they were not at my wedding. For 5 long years, I was no one's daughter. Then, last month, my sister was rushed into the emergency room, bleeding, unconscious, and dying. The trauma team immediately paged the chief surgeon. The heavy doors swung open, and when my mother saw the name printed on the white coat walking toward her daughter's stretcher, she grabbed my father's arm so hard it left bruises. To understand how we got to that operating room, let me take you back to the fall of 2019, to a kitchen table in Hartford, Connecticut. That was the very last time my father ever looked at me with pride. Growing up, there were 2 daughters in the Yolette house, but only one who actually mattered. My sister, Monica, is 3 years older than me. She came out of the womb performing, participating in school plays, student council, and being the kind of girl who could talk to any adult at a dinner party and make them laugh. My parents, Jerry and Diane Yolette, adored her for it. They were salt of the earth, middle-class people. Dad managed a manufacturing plant, and Mom did part-time bookkeeping. They valued 2 things above all else, which were appearances and obedience. Monica delivered both flawlessly every single day. I was the quiet one, the daughter with her nose buried in a biology textbook at Thanksgiving, while Monica held court at the table. I wasn't rebellious and I wasn't difficult. I was simply invisible. There is a distinct difference between being forgotten and never being seen in the first place. Here is a small example of how things were in our household. In the 8th grade, I made it to the state science fair. I was the only kid from our entire school to qualify. That exact same weekend, Monica had a minor performance in a community theater production. One guess as to where my parents went. When I came home alone with a second-place ribbon, Dad glanced up at it and said, "That is nice, Rennie." He didn't ask what my project was about, and he never did. I told myself it didn't hurt. I told myself I didn't need their attention. Instead, I poured every ounce of my energy into my grades, my AP classes, and my college applications. I figured if I couldn't be the daughter they noticed, I would become the daughter they couldn't ignore. And for one brief, shining moment, I succeeded. The day I got accepted into Oregon Health and Science University's medical program, 3,000 miles away from Hartford, something shifted. For the first time in my life, my father really looked at me, and said 5 words I had waited 18 years to hear. But before I tell you what he said, you need to understand what Monica did the moment she realized the spotlight was moving away from her. The acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday in April. I remember it clearly because Monica was visiting for the weekend. She was 22 then, working as a marketing coordinator at a mid-level firm in Stamford. It was a fine job and a fine life. Fine was Monica's ceiling, though she would never admit it. Dad read the letter aloud at the kitchen table. His eyebrows went up in surprise. Oregon Health and Science, he said slowly, like he was tasting the words. That is a real medical school. Then he looked directly at me and said, "Maybe you will make something of yourself after all, Rennie." It wasn't a real compliment, but it was the closest thing to one I had ever received from him, and I held on to it like oxygen. Mom called Aunt Ruth that night. She called her sister. She called 2 neighbors. Irene got into medical school. Can you believe it? Her voice had a pitch to it that I had never heard before. It was pride, genuine, undiluted pride directed entirely at me. At dinner, I glanced across the table at Monica. She was smiling, but it was the kind of smile that stops completely at the mouth. Her eyes were doing something else entirely, calculating, measuring, and recalibrating. I know that now. At the time, I just thought she was tired from the drive. That week, Monica started calling me constantly, 2 or 3 times a week. "How is packing going? Who is your roommate? What is Portland like?" She asked about my schedule, my classmates, and my professors. She remembered every single name I mentioned. I genuinely thought my sister was finally seeing me. I thought my getting into medical school had unlocked a real connection between us, respect, connection, whatever it is that normal sisters have. In reality, I was feeding her ammunition. Every detail, every name, every vulnerability, I handed it all over to her with a grateful smile. Everything cracked open during my 3rd year of medical school. My roommate and best friend was a woman named Sarah Mitchell. She had grown up in the foster care system, had no family to speak of, and was the single reason I survived our grueling first year. When I called home once during a brutal anatomy exam week, and Mom said, "Can't talk, Rennie, Monica is having a rough day at work," it was Sarah who sat on our apartment floor with me. She looked at me and said, "They're lost. Now get up. We have cadavers to memorize." Then, in August of our 3rd year, Sarah was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She had no support system, just me. The very next morning, I went to the dean's office and explained the situation. He approved a formal leave of absence for 1 semester under caregiver status. The paperwork was filed, my spot was held, and I was scheduled to return in January. It was all documented and completely legitimate. I moved into the spare bedroom at Sarah's apartment. I drove her to chemotherapy, and I held her hand in the oncology ward at 3 o'clock in the morning when the pain got so severe she couldn't breathe. I called Monica to tell her what was happening. I don't know why. Maybe I still believed she was the sister she had been pretending to be. I told her about Sarah, about the leave of absence, and about my plan to return to school in the spring. Monica's voice was pure syrup. "Oh my God, Rennie, I am so sorry. Take all the time you need. I won't say a word to Mom and Dad. I know they would just worry." 3 days later, she called our parents. I didn't know the exact words she used that night. I wouldn't learn the full scope of her lie until 5 years later, when it unraveled in the one place none of us expected. But the damage was instant. The call came at 11 o'clock at night. I was sitting in a plastic chair next to Sarah's hospital bed. She had suffered a terrible reaction to her latest round of chemotherapy, and they had admitted her overnight. My phone lit up with my father's caller ID. "Your sister told us everything," Dad said. His voice was flat, cold, and arctic. The dropping out, the boyfriend, all of it. "Dad, that is not true. Please don't," I started to say. "Don't lie, Irene. Monica showed us the messages. She showed us proof." I pressed my hand against the hospital wall to steady myself. "What messages? What proof?" "Dad, I am sitting in a hospital room right now. I am taking care of my friend." There was a heavy pause on the line. "Monica said you would say exactly that," he replied. "She said you would have a story ready." My mother got onto the extension line, her voice shaking with anger. "How could you lie to us for a whole year, Irene?" "Mom, please listen to me. I filed a formal leave of absence. I can show you the paperwork. I can give you the dean's direct number." "Enough," Dad interrupted. "Don't call this house again until you're ready to tell the truth. You have embarrassed this family enough." The line went completely dead. I sat on that cold hospital floor for 20 minutes. Sarah's for monitor beeped steadily on the other side of the curtain. My phone screen still showed the call duration, 4 minutes and 12 seconds. That is exactly how long it took my parents to completely erase me. 20 minutes later, a text message arrived from Monica. "I am sorry, Rennie. I had to tell them. I couldn't keep your secret anymore." She wasn't sorry at all. She had just executed the most precise strike of her life, and she had signed it with a broken heart emoji as a signature. I was 3,000 miles away from Hartford. I had $46 left in my checking account, and I had just officially become no one's daughter. I tried to fix it. I need you to know that I tried everything I humanly could from 3,000 miles away, with no money and a dying friend in the next room. Over the next 5 days, I called my parents 14 times. The first 3 calls went straight to voicemail. By the 4th attempt, Dad's number was blocked. Mom blocked my number 2 days later. I sent 2 emails, one short and direct, one long and detailed. The long email had my official leave of absence paperwork attached as a PDF file. I included the dean's direct phone number, and I included Sarah's oncologist's name. I gave them every single piece of evidence a reasonable person would ever need to see the truth. Neither email received a single response. Next, I wrote a handwritten letter. I mailed it via priority mail from Portland so I could track it. 5 days later, it arrived back at my apartment. It was marked Return to Sender, completely unopened. I recognized my mother's sharp handwriting on the envelope. Desperate, I called Aunt Ruth, Dad's younger sister, the only person in our extended family who had ever treated me like I mattered. Ruth called Dad that very same evening. She called me back 40 minutes later, her voice incredibly heavy. "He told me to stay out of it, sweetheart," she whispered. "He said you made your bed." Ruth had tried to tell him about the leave of absence paperwork, but Dad had hung up on her. 5 days, 14 calls, 2 emails, 1 certified letter, and 1 family intermediary. All of it was rejected, blocked, or returned. And here is the thing that truly sealed it. This wasn't actually new behavior. This was the exact pattern of my entire life, simply compressed into its most brutal form. It was every science fair they skipped, every recital they forgot, and every single time Monica's version of reality was accepted without a single question, while mine was instantly dismissed. This was just the final, loudest iteration of the family dynamic. On the 6th day, I stopped calling. Not because I gave up, but because I finally realized they had made their choice a long time ago. Monica hadn't forced them to abandon me. She had simply given them permission to stop pretending they cared. Sarah died on a quiet Sunday morning in December. There was only the steady beep of the monitor going flat and the pale winter light cutting through the hospice window. I was the only person in the room. No one from my family called because no one knew. The only person I had told was Monica, and she was far too busy tending to the lie she had planted to care that the real reason for my leave of absence had just stopped breathing. I organized a small funeral for Sarah. Exactly 6 people came. Her former foster sister drove up from Eugene. A couple of our medical school classmates showed up, and 1 nurse from the oncology ward who had grown fond of her attended. I stood at the front of a chapel built to hold 60 people, and I read her eulogy to rows of entirely empty pews. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't completely broken, but because I had been crying nonstop for 3 months straight, and there were simply no tears left inside me. That night, I sat alone in our apartment. Sarah's coffee mug was still sitting on the kitchen counter, and her jacket was still hanging by the front door. I opened my laptop and stared blankly at the online application to re-enroll for the spring semester. As I moved her things, I found a note tucked inside her copy of Grey's Anatomy, which was our running joke. She had bookmarked the chapter on the pancreas with a bright yellow sticky note. Her handwriting was shaky but deliberate. "Finish what you started. Irene, become the doctor I know you are, and don't you dare let anyone, especially your own blood, tell you who you are." She had written it weeks before she passed away. She knew she wouldn't be there when I desperately needed that final push. I stared at her words, closed the laptop, and then opened it right back up. I filled out the re-enrollment form. I realized I had exactly 2 options. I could crumble or I could climb. I chose to climb. I didn't do it for my parents, and I didn't do it for revenge. I did it for Sarah and for the version of myself that she completely believed in. I went back to medical school in January. I had 0 family support, no financial safety net, and a mountain of grief. I picked up extra student loans, took on a part-time research assistant position, and ate leftover hospital cafeteria food more times than I care to admit. Medical school does not care about your personal tragedy. Anatomy exams do not pause just because your family completely disowned you. 12-hour clinical rotations do not get shorter because you spent the night crying in a supply closet at 2 o'clock in the morning. So I stopped crying and I started working. I worked like my entire life depended on it because in a very real way it did. I graduated entirely on time. No one from Hartford came to watch me cross the stage. I matched into a highly competitive surgical residency at Mercyhurst Medical Center back on the East Coast, a level 1 trauma center, and one of the busiest hospitals in Connecticut. That was where I met Dr. Margaret Thornton. Maggie was 58 years old, the chief of surgery emeritus, and she was built like a steel cable wrapped inside a lab coat. She became the mentor I desperately needed and the true mother figure I had lost. During my 3rd year of residency, I met Nathan Caldwell. He was a civil rights attorney doing pro bono work at a local community clinic near the hospital. He had incredibly calm eyes and a wonderfully dry sense of humor. He was the very first person I told the full, unfiltered story to who didn't flinch, didn't offer empty pity, and didn't try to immediately fix it. He just listened to me. When I finished, he looked at me and said 4 simple words: "You deserve better." That was enough for me. We got married on a beautiful Saturday afternoon in Maggie's backyard with just 30 guests. Nathan's father proudly walked me down the aisle. I had actually sent an invitation to the house in Hartford, but it came back exactly the way my letter had years ago, completely unopened. Aunt Ruth was there, though, and she cried enough for 2 parents combined. After the ceremony, Maggie handed me a securely sealed envelope. "A nomination," she said with a knowing smile. "Don't open it yet. You are not quite ready." I tucked it safely into my desk drawer without asking a single question. 5 years passed. I built a life, gained confidence, and became a woman my parents would no longer recognize. By January of the present day, I was 32 years old. I was officially named the Chief of Trauma Surgery at Mercyhurst Medical Center. I had a beautiful home in the suburbs with a porch that caught the perfect morning light, a husband who made me laugh every single day, and a golden retriever named Hippocrates, Hippo for short, who never once judged me for eating cereal at midnight. It was a good life, a real life, built brick by brick with my own 2 hands. But there is a specific kind of ache that never fully fades away. It lives permanently in that hollow space between your ribs, right where family is supposed to be. I didn't wake up crying anymore, and I didn't check my phone constantly hoping for a Hartford area code. But every single Thanksgiving, there was a brief flash of pain. I would set the table, count the plates, and feel their absence like a phantom limb. Aunt Ruth still called me every single Sunday. She was my only remaining thread back to that old world. I never asked about my parents or Monica, but I always listened quietly when she volunteered information. She told me Mom and Dad were healthy. She mentioned that Monica had gotten divorced 2 years ago and was now selling medical devices. The sheer irony of her career choice was not lost on me. Then, last week, Ruth called me with a completely different tone in her voice, sounding incredibly cautious. "Irene, there's something I really need to tell you about Monica," she said. "Something deeply concerning." Before she could finish her sentence, my hospital pager went off loudly. It was a trauma activation. I told Ruth I had to go and promised to call her right back. I never got the chance to make that call, because the exact thing Ruth was trying to warn me about was already hurtling down Interstate 91 at 60 miles per hour, inside a sedan that was about to run a solid red light. Within the hour, the subject of her warning would be lying directly on my operating table, bleeding out, with my parents panicking in the waiting room and my name printed clearly on the chart. I just didn't know it yet. Let me back up, because what Monica did wasn't a single lie. It was a massive, calculated campaign. Ruth had been feeding me small pieces of the truth over the years, reluctantly and carefully, like she was defusing a bomb 1 wire at a time. The picture she painted was far worse than anything I had ever imagined. For 5 years, Monica masterfully maintained the narrative. At every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, and every single family gathering, she flawlessly performed the role of the grieving, disappointed older sister. "We don't really talk about Irene," she would whisper to our cousins. "It is just too painful for Mom and Dad." She would shake her head, lower her voice, and let the heavy silence do the rest of the work. But she didn't just stop at silence. She actively added horrific details. She told our aging grandmother that I was completely homeless. She told Uncle Pete's wife that she had heard from mutual friends that I was in and out of rehab facilities. She told her mother on Christmas Eve 2 years ago that she had desperately tried to reach out to me, but that I had viciously refused, claiming that I was the one who cut them off. She completely flipped the entire story on its head. She sat at the Thanksgiving table, Ruth told me once, her voice tight with fury, and said, I have begged Irene to come home, but she won't even answer my calls. I think she just hates us. Meanwhile, during those exact holidays, I was often 3 floors deep in an operating room, desperately working to save a teenager's life. The absolute genius of it, and I use that specific word with complete disgust, was that Monica didn't need my parents to forget about me. She needed them to believe that I had entirely abandoned them. That way, their profound grief became proof of her loyalty. Their bitter silence became justified, and she remained exactly what she had always wanted to be, the loyal, perfect daughter, the only one who stayed behind. She wasn't protecting them from heartbreak. She was protecting her exclusive position in their lives. And there was one more terrifying thing Ruth told me, something I didn't fully learn until much later that made the whole picture even darker. Nathan actually told me about this over coffee one morning about 6 months ago, after sitting on the information for 2 full years. There is something I didn't tell you, he said, setting his mug down carefully, the exact way he does when he is about to deliver bad news in his formal lawyer voice. 2 years ago, I got a random call from Human Resources at your old hospital. Someone using a completely fake name had contacted them, asking extensively about the employment status of Irene Yolette. They wanted to know if you had ever been formally disciplined, and if your medical credentials were even legitimate. I stared at him in disbelief, asking who would do that. He answered that he had a close colleague trace the digital inquiry, and the IP address came back directly to a location in Hartford. The kitchen went completely quiet as he said those words. Hippo's tail thumped softly against the floor, and the coffee maker hissed in the background. She was trying to find something, I whispered. Anything, Nathan confirmed. Anything she could possibly use to keep her malicious story alive, to prove to your parents that you were an absolute fraud. But she didn't find anything, I said. No, because there is absolutely nothing to find, Nathan replied, reaching across the table to put his hand over mine. I wrapped my hands around my mug tightly, feeling the intense heat bleeding through the ceramic. She didn't just lie about me once, Nathan. She has been actively hunting me down. He looked at me seriously and said, That is not sibling rivalry, Irene. That is something else entirely. He was right. Monica hadn't told a simple lie and moved on with her life. She had built an entire architecture of deception, complete with load-bearing walls and reinforced beams, and she had spent 5 years making sure none of them ever cracked. Every holiday story, every whispered rumor, every fake human resources inquiry was another brick in her wall. I could have done something right then. I could have hired a lawyer, confronted my parents directly, or blown the whole thing wide open. But I didn't. I didn't have to, because life was about to do it for me in the most brutal, public, and ironic way imaginable. And it all started with a pager at 3 o'clock in the morning on a cold Thursday night in January. At exactly 3:07 a.m., the piercing sound of the pager dragged me out of a dead sleep. Nathan shifted beside me, murmuring something incoherent, while Hippo lifted his heavy head from the foot of the bed. The small screen glowed brightly in the dark, displaying the chilling words: Level 1 trauma, motor vehicle collision, single female, age 35, blunt abdominal trauma, hemodynamically unstable. Estimated time of arrival 8 minutes. I was dressed in 4 minutes and driving in 6. The roads were completely empty and wet, reflecting that particular shade of deep black that January always gives you in Connecticut. As I drove, I ran through the case in my head the exact way I always do, calculating the mechanism of injury, probable organ involvement, and immediate surgical options. With a motor vehicle collision and blunt abdominal trauma paired with unstable vitals, I knew I was likely looking at a splenic rupture and a possible liver laceration. I had successfully performed this exact surgery 100 times before. I badged in through the ambulance bay entrance and walked straight to the busy trauma bay, where my team was already quickly assembling. 2 residents, a trauma nurse, and an anesthesia team were on standby. I picked up the intake iPad from the charge nurse's station and swiped to see the incoming patient's chart. The screen read, Patient Monica Yolette, date of birth March 14th, 1990, emergency contact Gerald Yolette, father. I stopped walking completely. The hallway noise, the frantic beeping of monitors, the overhead intercom, and the squeak of shoes on linoleum all pulled back instantly like a receding tide. For 2 seconds, maybe 3, I wasn't a professional surgeon. I was a helpless 26-year-old sitting on a cold hospital floor in Portland, a warm phone in my hand, listening to a dead dial tone. Dr. Yolette, my charge nurse Linda, appeared at my shoulder, asking if I was okay. I looked up, blinked hard, and set the iPad down. I told her I was fine, instructed her to prep Bay 2, and ordered her to page Dr. Patel because I wanted him on standby. The ambulance siren wailed loudly in the distance, getting closer by the second, and behind that ambulance, I knew before I could even see them, were 2 people I had not faced in 5 long years. The ambulance doors cracked open, and the stretcher came through the doors fast. Monica was securely strapped down, completely unconscious, her oxygen mask fogging rapidly with shallow, desperate breaths. There was dark blood on her shirt, and one hand hung entirely limp off the side rail. The paramedics rattled off numbers, reporting that her blood pressure was dropping fast while her heart rate was climbing, and that they had 2 large-bore IVs running wide open. Behind them, running in a complete panic, came my parents. My mother looked like she had aged a decade since I last saw her. Her hair was thinner, and her face was heavily drawn. She was wearing a bathrobe with slippers placed on the wrong feet. My father was in a flannel shirt and jeans thrown on in a mad rush, his face the exact color of old paper. "That is my daughter," he shouted loudly past the triage nurse, demanding to know where they were taking her and insisting that he needed to talk to the doctor in charge. The triage nurse, a woman named Carla whom I had worked closely with for 3 years, put both hands up to stop him. She calmly told him that the family needed to wait in the surgical waiting area, assuring him that the trauma team was already here and that the chief was handling this case personally. Hearing the word chief, Dad grabbed Carla's arm tightly and demanded that she get him the chief immediately. Carla glanced through the clear glass partition toward the trauma bay and looked directly at me, fully gowned, gloved, with my official badge hanging from my scrub top. She read the name written on it. Her eyes went wide for just a fraction of a second, but I gave a small, firm shake of my head, signaling not now. Carla composed herself instantly, telling my father that the chief was currently prepping for surgery and that they would be updated as soon as possible. She guided them away, pointing out the waiting room. As my parents were led down the hall, Mom was whispering frantic prayers, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles were completely white. Dad kept turning back, looking desperately through every single window he passed. "She is all we have," he said to no one in particular, his voice echoing down the corridor. "Please, she is all we have." I heard it clearly through the partition glass, every single painful word. "She is all we have," spoken as if I had never existed. I stepped into the scrub room alone, allowing myself exactly 30 seconds. I turned on the faucet, letting the water run hot over my hands while looking at my reflection in the stainless steel mirror above the sink. My image looked distorted and warped, which was the exact way everything felt right now. With my scrub cap on and my badge clearly visible, I was the face of a woman who had been surgically removed from her own family tree, now being asked to surgically save the woman who held the saw. Part of me desperately wanted to walk out, call Patel, and let someone else carry this heavy burden. Let my parents owe their daughter's life to a total stranger, not to me. That would be cleaner and simpler for everyone. But there was a dying woman on that table with a ruptured spleen and a grade 3 liver laceration. She was losing blood faster than we could replace it, and she was going to die in the next 30 to 40 minutes if the absolute best surgeon in this building didn't operate immediately. And the best surgeon in this building was me. I paged Patel directly and stated that I had a clear conflict of interest because the patient was an immediate family member. I disclosed it formally and documented it in the chart, telling him that if at any point my judgment appeared compromised, he was to take the lead with no questions asked. Patel's voice was steady as he replied, "Understood, Chief." I told Linda to note the disclosure in the nursing record, keeping everything strictly by the book and on paper. Then I pulled on fresh gloves, pushed through the heavy operating room doors, and looked down at the table. My sister's face was still bruised, her oxygen mask fogging and clearing rhythmically. She looked so much smaller than I remembered and much thinner. There were deep, worry lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 5 years ago. For 3 seconds, she wasn't the malicious woman who destroyed my life. She was simply a body on my table. And that was exactly how I needed her to be. I looked at my team and said, "Let us go, Scalpel." It took exactly 3 hours and 40 minutes to rebuild what the steering column and the red light had torn apart. Her spleen was completely ruptured, so we removed it entirely. The grade 3 liver laceration was severe, but we repaired it with precision sutures, layer by painstaking layer. There was intense internal bleeding from 2 separate mesenteric vessels, which we clamped, cauterized, and successfully controlled. I did not speak a single word unless it was absolutely necessary for the procedure, only calling for suction, clamp, lap pad, and retract. My hands moved precisely the way they had been trained to move: steady, deliberate, fast when speed mattered, and slow when precision mattered more. The residents watched my movements intently, as they always do during my complex cases, and I could feel their attention sharpen when the liver repair got incredibly tricky. I did not falter because I couldn't afford to. At exactly 6:48 a.m., I placed the final closing stitch. Monica's vitals were completely stable, her blood pressure had normalized, and her output was clear. She was alive. Dr. Patel, who had been standing silently in the corner the entire time, pulled his mask down and said quietly, "Irene, that was absolutely flawless. Do you want me to go talk to the family?" I peeled off my bloody gloves, dropped them in the bin, and washed my hands in an automatic, methodical way, the exact same way I had done it 10,000 times before. I looked at him and said, "No, this one is mine." I caught my reflection again in the scrub room mirror, seeing the same face and the same badge, but knowing something had profoundly shifted. For 5 years, I had been the daughter who disappeared. Now, I was the chief surgeon who had just pulled her sister back from the edge of absolute death. Those two facts were about to collide in a waiting room 40 feet away, right in front of my entire night shift team. I straightened my scrub top, checked my badge, took one deep breath, and walked toward the waiting room. The hallway had never felt so long. The waiting room had that specific fluorescent hush that hospitals always get at 7 in the morning. 2 other families were scattered in the far corners, and a television murmured morning weather reports to absolutely no one. In the center row, sitting rigid, sleepless, and completely terrified, were my parents. I pushed through the double doors, still wearing my surgical scrubs, my mask pulled down around my neck, my scrub cap off, and my hair pulled back tightly. My badge hung at chest level, printed in clean, bold block letters that anyone could easily read from 6 feet away. Dr. Irene Yolette, MD, FACS, Chief of Trauma Surgery. Dad stood up first, which was his automatic reflex, the constant need to be in charge. "Doctor, how is she? Is Monica?" he started to ask, but he stopped abruptly. His eyes dropped instantly to my badge, then rose to my face, then dropped to the badge again. I watched the shocking recognition move through him like a physical blow, a visible tremor that started in his hands and climbed straight to his jaw. Mom looked up a half-second later, her lips parting, but no sound came out. Her right hand shot out to Dad's forearm and clamped down, digging into the flannel of his sleeve with a desperate force. There were 5 long seconds of absolute silence, 5 seconds that held the weight of 5 years. I spoke first, keeping my voice calm, professional, and clinical, using the exact tone I used to address every single family in this room. "Mr. and Mrs. Yolette, I am Dr. Yolette, Chief of Trauma Surgery. Your daughter, Monica, sustained a ruptured spleen and a grade 3 liver laceration in the accident. The surgery was successful. She is stable and currently recovering in the intensive care unit, and you'll be able to see her in approximately 1 hour." Saying Mr. and Mrs. instead of Mom and Dad landed heavily, and I watched it cut them deeply. Behind me, through the glass partition, Linda and two nurses were watching the entire interaction, their faces showing they had already put the pieces together. My mother moved first, taking a frantic step toward me with her arms lifting, a loud sob breaking through her chest as she cried, "Irene, oh my God, Irene." I stepped back half a step, a polite but unmistakable boundary. She froze instantly, her hands hanging awkwardly in the air between us before slowly, painfully dropping to her sides. Dad's voice came out sounding like gravel dragged over concrete as he whispered, "You are a doctor." I looked at him and said, "I am." He looked again and said, "You are the chief." I replied, "I am." "But Monica said," she said. He stammered, unable to finish. He closed his mouth, opened it, and closed it again, and I could see the machinery of his mind trying to reassemble 5 years of absolute certainty that was crumbling in real time. Mom was crying openly now, sobbing that they thought I dropped out because Monica told them I was gone. "She told you I dropped out, that I had a boyfriend with a drug problem, that I was homeless, and that I refused to contact you," I said, keeping my voice level with no shaking and no tears. I had rehearsed this exact moment 1,000 times in the shower, in the car, and in the dark before sleep, though I never thought it would happen in surgical scrubs under harsh fluorescent lights. None of it was true, I told them, not a single word. Through the glass behind me, I could see Carla press a hand to her mouth in shock, while a second-year resident looked away with a tight jaw, and Linda set down her clipboard to stare. Dad tried to redirect the conversation using an old instinct, stating that this wasn't the time or place because my sister was in the intensive care unit. I looked at him and said, "I know, I just spent 3 hours and 40 minutes making sure she survives. So yes, Dad, I'm fully aware of where she is." He had absolutely nothing to say. For the first time in my life, my father, a man who had never been at a loss for a decree, was completely speechless. The heavy silence was doing the work I never could. 5 years of blocked calls, returned letters, and ignored emails had never made a dent. But standing here alive, highly accomplished, and wearing the proof on my chest was louder than anything I could have ever written in a letter. Mom reached for the back of a plastic chair to steady herself, whispering about the letters and asking if I really sent them. I replied that I sent 2 emails with my leave of absence paperwork attached, and 1 handwritten letter mailed via priority mail which they sent back unopened, noting that I recognized her handwriting on the envelope. She pressed her fist tightly against her mouth, and Dad stared blankly at the floor. I told them I called 14 times in 5 days and asked Aunt Ruth to talk to them, but Dad told her to stay out of it. I wasn't accusing them. I was simply reciting the cold facts, and facts do not need volume. Then Linda appeared at the door, completely unaware of the family drama, but carrying urgent hospital business. "Dr. Yolette, I am sorry to interrupt," she said, "but the board chair saw the overnight trauma log and asked me to pass along that the Physician of the Year Selection Committee sends their warmest congratulations on tonight's difficult surgical outcome." Linda said it the way she would say anything routine, having absolutely no idea she had just detonated a second bomb in the room. Mom looked at me, her eyes swollen and her mascara completely gone, repeating the words Physician of the Year. I turned to Linda, told her thank you, and stated that I needed to check post-operative vitals. I excused myself and walked toward the intensive care corridor with measured steps, keeping my spine completely straight. I did not look back once, but I clearly heard my mother's breaking voice behind me, sobbing, "Jerry, what have we done?" And then I heard something I had never heard in my entire life, which was my father saying absolutely nothing, because silence was the only honest thing he had left. For hours later, in intensive care room 6, the monitor was beeping in a steady rhythm as the morning light angled through the window blinds. I walked in for the standard post-operative assessment to check her vitals, drainage output, and wound. It was a routine check, except absolutely nothing about this was routine. Monica's eyes were open, glassy and unfocused from the anesthesia, but open. She blinked at the ceiling, then at the 4-pole, and then her gaze tracked sideways to me. She squinted, read my badge, and then read it again. The color drained from her face completely, in a way I have only seen in patients who have just been told their prognosis is fatal. Irene. Her voice sounded like rough sandpaper. I looked down at her and said, "Good morning, Monica. I am your attending surgeon. You sustained a ruptured spleen and a grade 3 liver laceration from the accident. The surgery went well, and you're going to make a full recovery. You are a doctor," she whispered, which wasn't a question, but a sudden reckoning. I looked at her and said, "I am the chief of this department, and I have been for 2 years." I watched the exact same spectrum of emotions move across her face that Dad had gone through, only slower because Monica was processing the shock through a heavy morphine drip and dawning terror. It was confusion first, then disbelief, then fear, and then there it was, the quick calculation flicker behind the eyes. Even now, lying in a hospital bed with my sutures holding her liver together, Monica was desperately trying to figure out how to spin the narrative. "Irene, listen, I can explain," she rasped. I looked at her, nodded toward the glass door where 2 wrecked figures stood in the hallway watching with red eyes, and said, "You don't need to explain anything to me. You need to explain it to them." I updated her chart, checked the drain, and left the room without another word, because the truth was finally loud enough.